that?
What do you got?
We're trying to change something.
Skateboarding is a way of learning how to redefine the world around you.
The owners of this country don't care about the poor and your owners.
Now, baby, push me. Push me again now.
Screaming out a wall.
What's up, you miscreants, you misfits, you outcast of society? Welcome back. We're back. Season 2 of Screaming at a Wall podcast. I just want to say thank you for all the people that have subscribed, listened thus far. I feel like I'm just floating right there, just head. I'm like that death row photo of Tupac and Snoop Dogg. And anyway, we're back. Season 2. I'm only saying season 2 because I took such a long break, so why not just break that up, you know? I'm actually lying to myself. I had a lot going on, and I had to take a little break, take a little step back, recalibrate, readjust, and I am in a better place to be able to do this. I do want to say something pretty awesome has happened with my brother, he was serving 2-7 life sentences, and with 60 years enhancements on top of that. He's been down for 19 years. It's pretty crazy to think about. But they have what they call the elderly law, and it was 60 years of age, then you were eligible to go out for parole if you weren't in there for murder or something like that. Anyway, they just dropped it down to 50. He's 46. That means he has 4 years to go, possibly, to get out, to be a free person. And I just, maybe if you could throw some positive energy out there for me and for him, and anybody else that can benefit from that law, because, you know, people deserve a second chance. And so, Eben Sterling, he's the author of the YOGI in Disneyland. Eben has also worked at Thrasher for 26 years. But we don't really talk about that too much. We talk about his book, we talk about his spiritual journey and how it connects to his life, specifically the details in the book, and we explore that a little bit. And as someone that was a little apprehensive when I first heard about the book, I have to say, after reading the book, I have a new outlook. I have a new perspective. And I think that that's one of the main reasons why I do this podcast in the first place, is I'm trying to connect with different people from different subcultures and different backgrounds and different journeys, because I think that's what life is about. It's about trying to understand each other, and not always be in a combative tribal state. You know, that you're different than I am, and I don't understand that. So, you know, so yeah, it was good. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that you enjoy it. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. And we have a lot of interviews like coming up, so I just back on that horse. I'm grinding, doing 50/50s. So, without further ado, enjoy this interview with Eben Sterling. I look like a floating head right here. Hey, can I get some like backlight or something? I mean, who's running this operation, really? I don't know. The author of the YOGI in Disneyland, Eben Sterling. You'd like to say hi to our audience, Eben?
Yeah, what's up? I do not represent against the stream, just using the space.
Just using the space. We appreciate them for allowing us to be here.
Yeah, don't let me sully their reputation.
You actually represent Thrasher pretty heavy, right?
That I do.
Yeah?
Sure, I'll take that.
You'll take that. How long have you been working at Thrasher?
Coming up on, 28 years.
Damn.
28 and a half years.
So, interesting fact, when I was opening up my skate shop, apparently I reached out to you at one point.
That's right. Pretty funny. That's the beauty of using Gmail all these years. I searched in my emails and found one from you from like 2015 or something.
That's
hit me up for ad rates.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
So for the people that don't know, what do you do at Thrasher?
The advertising director. So I basically do the sales of ads into the magazine and onto the website.
Yeah. How did you get involved with working with him?
I basically did drugs with the guy that had my job before me. I knew the guy that knew the guy, or I knew the guy that had the shit. I was the guy that knew the guy, and the guy that had the job before me. I actually started at Slap Skateboard Magazine back when that was still going, 1993. And the guy that had the job as a Slap ad director before me wanted to get high, and I knew where to get the shit. And I was a skateboarder first, I should say. So that's how we met. And then we got high and got to talking. And he said, and I was super into hip hop, especially at the time. And he was like, "Oh, I'm leaving Slap. You should get this job. You're all into skating and hip hop." And I was like, "Yes, I should."
And the rest is history.
Yeah, long at 93 to infinity. Fucking long ass time, man.
Damn. So when I first, I guess, when this book fell into my orbit, right, I was confused. Right.
Good response.
I really was. I mean, especially, I guess, as someone on the spiritual path. And then, of course, the punk rock connection to that as well. You know, and I think we had like discussed this before. You know, Disneyland sort of now, you know, I don't know if it always represented the looming figure trying to sort of control, you know, media.
I mean, I think also, you know, maybe what you're getting at too is sort of this media hegemony, especially with Disney buying Fox and Star Wars and all these things. I mean, it is this huge conglomerate as far as media control and money goes. So there is that aspect to it, which I in no way, you know, want to not be aware of. Believe me, I was just as skeptical and surprised when I had the experience that I did going to Disneyland, and then subsequently watching all the animated features kind of back to back. So, you know, kind of to answer your question, I mean, what happened for me was that I had a kid, you know, and I will say this, the last time I had gone to Disneyland was in my eighth grade trip to Disneyland. I grew up in Southern California, so we got to go to Disneyland in eighth grade. So I didn't go back to, you know, and at that time, ironically enough, I had my first mohawk. I literally brought like a boom box and we sat on the back of the school bus and I literally had TSOL Code Blue and I think maybe the Plasmatics, you know, and it was like, we would just, 1, 2, fuck you was like how they'd start the songs on the Plasmatics, and we just thought that was the sickest thing we'd ever heard in our lives. And in eighth grade, if you had that, you know, it was like, well, fuck everybody. Like, you guys think you're cool. You think we're not cool, whatever. 1, 2, fuck you. Like, that was just like mic drop. You know what I mean? And then the other thing was Code Blue. And it's funny to think about that being 13 years old, you know, because I'm a father now. And I see what kids are, you know, what a 13-year-old's like. And the fact that at 13, we had this song Code Blue that was like, I want to fuck the dead.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's insane. Like, that's so taboo and so over the top. Like, just breaking every social norm and everything.
Offensive lyrics.
And you know, people like worry about like kids being exposed to things and this and that, like necromancy. Come on, man. Like, that's about as heavy of a song as I have ever heard. Yeah. You know what I mean? So at 13, that was my shit. Like, I want to fuck the dead. Like, again, it was just so, like, in the face of all convention and just it was so empowering as a kid. You know, I mean, all kids are basically oppressed because oppression is like not having the full rights of a human being, you know, of an adult, you know? So that's like what kids are in a sense. I mean, obviously some people are much more oppressed than others, but I'm just saying as the perception of somebody as a kid, it was like, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean I don't have the full rights of society? I don't have, I don't get to make my own decisions. I don't have, autonomy in this culture. Well, I want to fuck the dead, you know what I mean? Take this, motherfuckers, you know what I mean? So anyways, so that's where I was at the last time I went to Disneyland. Meaning, they didn't want to, it was like we were afraid they weren't going to let us in because of our hair and stuff like that. Back then Disneyland was a lot more like that,
And what year was this?
This would have been in like 1981, 1982, I think. I guess 1982. Yeah, 1980. Yeah, it must have been, because it was, 8th grade, 1982. Right before I got into Thrasher and skateboarding. So in any event, I didn't go back to Disneyland. I mean, much like you said, I went through, I got into punk rock, and it was this real anti-commercial, anti-capitalist, it was like alternative culture, do it yourself. Very much not like go buy the thing off the shelf kind of thing.
Yeah.
There wasn't, that sort of like you could just go to there were some punk stores and stuff, but there was only just like a few, and you had to really go and find them. They weren't at a shopping mall for sure. You know what I mean? So in any event, I'm just saying, like, I didn't expect Disney to resonate for me at any time in my life. And when then I had a kid, and when he was about 3, my wife was like, yeah, we got to take him to Disneyland. And I was like, yeah, that'd be sick. And I'm thinking, like, when I was a kid, you just go for a day and that's it. And you go home, you know what I mean? And then she's like, yeah, we got to go for like 3 days and shit. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What could you possibly do at Disneyland for 3 whole days?
Yeah.
In my family, we didn't ever stay at the Disneyland hotel or anything like that when I was a kid. I mean, we didn't have
I didn't even think they
money.
existed, right? Like,
there was the Disneyland hotel, but it was for like, I mean, I don't know how much of my perception of money was colored by my parents' perception of it, because they had their own issues with it, being like hippies and stuff like that. But in my own possibly self-impoverished mind state, or possibly just being poor, it was like, we don't have the money to do that. That's for rich people. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we didn't do that when I was a kid, is all I'm saying. My grandma would take me and we'd go for one day. And so I was like, you're crazy. Go to Disneyland for 3 days? Well, I went and I'd lost my mind. Like, I'd had this like spiritual experience.
How old was your kid?
He was 3.5, like 3 years old. And I talk about that's the very first part of the book, where I had this experience where I was on Main Street and the fireworks show's going on, and it's lit up crazy, very theatrical and dramatic. And there's this insane light show, and it's this multi-sensory experience, and the music is piping, and it's these songs that I remember from my childhood, and other cool stuff had sort of come in with all the Pirates of the Caribbean and that whole kind of vibe starting to take over more at Disneyland, instead of the more Americana and like Victorian era stuff, that Mary Poppins and shit like that. When I was a kid, like all that corny shit, like turn of the century America and stuff, and the Western and all that stuff had taken a real back seat by the time I was 40, it had become this place of fantasy and pirates and Star Wars and then the fairy tales and all those great stories. So I'm sitting there, it's in the book, whatever, I have my kid on my shoulders, and I just have this moment of total acceptance and total connection, which is basically what yoga means linguistically, is like union, having a connection. The way I explain it is sort of having an outward connection is yoga, and then having a sense of wholeness inwardly. And that's what I had at that moment. I felt connected to, and it's weird because, I was an American studies major in school and college, so I've studied American history and American politics. Listening to the Grateful Dead and stuff, I have a respect and a connection to sort of Americana. And I'd listen to a lot like Merle Haggard and cool country music, honky tonk music, and
Outlaw stuff, yeah.
blues, lots of blues and that kind of, you know, so I had a sense of Americana, but at that moment I felt like a connection to my culture, to my identity, who I was as a person, to my upbringing, to my country even, which was really shocking as a punk rock, you know, anarchist, UCSC, you know, Ojai person, to have this connection of really feeling like to my country and to growing up in Southern California and to this weird commercial identity-based society that I grew up in. But all of a sudden it was just, I just had this moment of feeling oneness with my upbringing, with my current, with my past, and with my son, you know, being a father and seeing it through his eyes, I think just brought back, you know, this sense of comfort and ease,
non-judgment. I was going to say, like, not judging the experience, just being part of the experience. And we talked about this earlier, where I'm becoming sort of detached, and what reading this allowed me to do was just to get more of an understanding of those judgments that I have, and to be able to sort of look at the experience for what it is, and not to get too off track. But, you know, I was going to jump into the question of where you were spiritually, like at that point. What sort of led up to that point? Because I'm sure it was a culmination of different things that brought it all together for you. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that really ties it all together. That question has a real complexity and depth for me, because that's absolutely, you know, the precursor to my experience. You know, I had this sudden spiritual awakening that was actually this gradual process of being sober for, you know, 15 years or whatever it was at the time, and developing this conscious contact with this higher power and having a spiritual experience in recovery and a spiritual practice. And this was around, you know, not long after 2014. I had some things, you know, like happen where I just kind of started to get earnest about meditation. And right around that time, I read Noah Levine's book, The Revolution of the Heart, and that really resonated for me. And then Refuge Recovery came out like right at that same time, that book. And it was like I started sitting, you know, just through my recovery meditation practice. I used to do like what they call in yoga shavasana, which is like laying on your back meditation. And then I started sitting, and for whatever reason I got a little more earnest about it. So I was starting to do a daily meditation, you know, in those years, 2014, 2015, 2016. And then, you know, we're living in this age of a media revolution. I mean, unprecedented access to media and unprecedented access to information. So this knowledge that used to be very arcane, you know, almost secret knowledge, hidden knowledge, you know, Advaita, non-dualism, Buddhism, these really, you know, what used to be like these secret yogic teachings and things. You can just go on YouTube and like listen to some Swami break it down for you, and then, you know, in a couple days you like have a decent grasp of what non-dualism means. You know what I mean? Where people used to have to get initiated into cults and freaking go to the Himalayas and stuff to learn this stuff. And we're living in this age where we literally have the world's knowledge in our pockets all the fucking time, you know? And sure, we can sit there and scroll through freaking TikTok or, you know, Instagram Reels all day and just watch humanity, you know, and get into controversy and conflict. Or I just started looking up spiritual talks. And, you brought up Alan Watts earlier before this started, before the interview. And like, dude, listening to Alan Watts, like you can just dial in Alan Watts. I mean, like my parents would probably have to go to some like conference or something, or maybe hear it on the radio if they were lucky. You know what I mean? Now we just go, oh, Alan Watts,
Yeah.
You're like, I fucking know all kinds of shit about Zen and Buddhism and different sects of Buddhism. You can find out all about like mystic Christianity and just, I mean, dude, it was the right time, It was ripe for the picking, right when I was starting to discover my own inner self, and then to have all that historical, amazing research, essentially, of these people that had had these awakenings. And I was connected to a bit to the Ram Dass Fellowship, Krishna Das, the Kirtan chanting, and also Paramahansa Yogananda. I read his book. And then what was the other one? There was one other. And Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yeah,
oh, my God, dude. I mean, you could read like No Death, No Fear, No Death, or the one that's like about Buddhism and Christianity. Like he has his book, Anger. Oh, my, it like gives me goosebumps, dude. Like, those books are incredible. You know what I mean? So that's where I was at. So basically, and I know I'm going on, I'm sorry, but like
I was actually going to ask you if you could sort of expound on those different practices that you mentioned, because as someone who's learning about different cultures, subcultures, and then different religions, because there's so many different things that there is all that information out there, and sometimes it's kind of hard to navigate like through that. Can you talk a little bit more about Ram Dass and those practices?
Yeah, I mean, I can. I mean, they're all there for people that want to explore them, but I'll mostly say this, not to get kind of too ooh-ah about it or whatever, like magical about it, you know what I mean?
Mystical.
Yeah, but I don't know, maybe it's just because I was in recovery and we would talk about God's will and stuff like that all the time, and coincidences and serendipity and what's the one that was the big Carl Jung?
Not synchronicity.
Synchronicity.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So, but I really feel like once I started to seek, like one thing would lead to another, kind of like in Buddhism, dependent origination. Like I would just find one thing, and then that would sort of lead me to the next thing. And I don't know, it's funny to look back on that now that we know a little bit more about algorithms and targeting and social media. Like, I don't know, maybe Google just freaking turned me into a yogi, you know what I mean? I'm sure some of that happened too, you know what I mean? But I found out about Krishna Das from my aunt. I mean, I can go on and on about it, really, the whole story, but I try to say it fast. Like, my aunt turned me on to Krishna Das. She had studied with this guy, Baba Hari Das, who it turns out was Ram Dass's yoga teacher, like not asana, not hatha yoga, but like, jnana yoga, the knowledge of yoga. Like his teacher, when he went to India, he worked with this guy, Baba Hari Das, who set up this Hanuman temple in Santa Cruz. And Noah's dad did a lot of stuff there too. It was up on Mount Madonna. I get on tangents, but essentially I started listening to Krishna Das. That kind of turned me on to Ram Dass. And then Ram Dass's network was just starting to have all these podcasts and stuff at the time. So again, it was just like, it's a media fucking revolution, dude. I'm listening to Ram Dass talks from 30, 40 year career, this like brilliant Harvard professor who, researched LSD and went to India. Like, it was just insane, I mean, it's rad. You start searching and it's one step, leads to the next. So on top of Hari Das and Krishna Das, who's the kirtan guy, he does singing, chanting practice. We in my family, we had this connection to Paramahansa Yogananda, who was this famous yogi from the 20s, who kind of is one of the like pioneers of bringing yogic thought to the West. So I had these little seeds, and one kind of led to the next. There was Yogananda. I finally read his book, listened to a lot of Krishna Das's talks about bhakti yoga, about devotion and singing. Essentially what I'm trying to say is so one teacher was kind of leading me to another, and there was, what happened though was, okay, so I was saying that, about bhakti yoga and kirtan and what they call guru kripa, which is this devotional practice with a guru. So I was getting all these hits from these different places. And I was having an experience. I mean, I was feeling it internally in terms of connecting to it and feeling like there was a bigger truth out there. Started getting introduced to this idea of ultimate reality, which is something that, yogis talk about a lot, is sort of the ultimate reality is our connection to God, to the divine, that we're actually just all one being, that all being is one being, and that everything's connected in creation, and it's all this cycle of interconnectedness, which is a great thing to become aware of. So that was happening, but at the same time, Ram Dass, one of the things that he is so excellent about communicating, something he communicates so excellently is the idea of attachment to identity and the mind and thoughts and that kind of stuff. So I started to become aware that a lot of reality isn't based in ultimate reality, our connection, our oneness with all. A lot of reality isn't couched in material, what they call relative reality, which is like the 3D world, the material plane, that so much of reality actually just exists in the mind and in these identities that we attach to. When I'm angry or sad or whatever, Ram Dass would be like, who do you think you are? Who is that person that's suffering? What in my identity am I attached to that if I just, that's causing the suffering? So what I'm really, without getting too deep in that, I'm just trying to say that I got introduced to this idea of story, that the mind creates stories. And I will say this, that I also got turned on to that book, Sapiens, by Yuval Harari, which was this book that Obama had read in his last little stint as president. And he talks about it in this interview. And I could tell, when he was talking about it, I could see his eyes light up. And he's like, yeah, there's this book by this guy, Yuval Harari. He's Israeli, and he wrote this, and he starts explaining it. And it's funny because I've seen the clip since then, and the way he explains it, I'm like, that's actually not really what I got out of it, but I could just tell that it was something special. So again, in this new media revolution, I listened to that on Audible, and that was just incredible to mix that book, which just talks about the human experience and the development of humanity as this storytelling process. He tends to be pretty dismissive of religion and make-believe and sort of these structures of belief and reality based on story. Well, which is interesting because I was getting this, because when I got to Disneyland, and that's how I'm kind of trying to bring this whole thing around. So when I got to Disneyland, what I saw was stories. That was what, not only did I have this non-dual experience of connection, this yogic awakening of connection and wholeness to past, present, and future, but I also was awakened to these stories, these archetypal stories that exist there, and the power of creativity, that people look at what Walt Disney did as an escape, and people try to characterize what he created as an escape, but there's another side to that, as there is to everything, you know what I mean? And the other side to escape is adventure, is creativity. Like, in one hand, you could say that, you're just lost in the mind created reality. Well, let's take that a step further. Why do we have to stay within that paradigm that somehow these stories that our mind tell us are intrinsically evil or bad or something that we should transcend? Well, what if the mind actually is this fountain of creativity, in that maybe our very being is just God imagining, You know what I mean? Like there's something to manifestation of consciousness that is tied to entertainment. Like to think of this idea, I didn't make this up, but there's sort of this idea that like before when there was nothing, before there was something that manifested, there was this energy or something. And it was like, well, I can't perceive myself.
Right.
What's the next thing? You know what I mean? How did we go from nothing to something? But at the same time, I feel like there's this sort of possibility, narrative, story, whatever, that maybe God was just, maybe the force of the universe, the energy of creation was just fucking bored. You know, it was just, if you're just in a unitive state all the time, then that's great, but there's nothing happening. You know what I mean? And then something happened. And then you kind of have entertainment, you kind of have story, you have coming and going, you have beginning, middle, and end. That's story. That's what every life is. That's how we're a reflection of the universe, because we come into being, we live, we die. That's a story. Every life is a story. And so, I don't want, people to take, whatever, I don't care how people take it, but ultimately, but I'm just saying, like, I don't want that to sound trite in any way or shallow, like, oh, you mean life's just here to be entertained? But there's something deep to that too, you know what I mean? Like, if all of this is just the development of story, of entertainment, of something happening, let's not vilify that. Let's go have an adventure. Let's be creative. So when we write a book, when we write a song, where does it come from? Like, we literally, as a songwriter, as an author, as a painter, whatever your art form is, there was nothing there. There might have been some paints, there might have been a recording studio, there might have been a guitar, but there was nothing there. Now there's something there. You've written a song. Where does that come from?
Stephen Pressfield, he talks about that a lot, about where do these things come from? In the way that and it's interesting because to me, there's, I guess there's like a correlation between the way that you can describe your experiences on rides and what they represent, and the way that he talks about the creative process of where does it come from. And it's like that for him, it's this magical process of development. And so it's sort of in tune with that idea that there's nothing, and then it comes into existence, you create it, and then you get to observe it. And whether you enjoy it or you don't enjoy it or whatever it is, that's not to be said, but it's something from nothing. And it just reminds me a lot. And that's when I started when I was reading the book, I think it was the Pinocchio story, where I was really, because I wasn't really familiar too much. Can you just touch on that so the audience has a little bit of insight into kind of the structure of the book itself,
Sure.
But maybe just spotlight the Pinocchio story, just because I'm selfish and I want to hear it.
Well, it's a really good story, and that's the graphic that, other than the Durga graphic, the T-shirts that I made were the Pinocchio one. It's done by Jeremy Fish. And at some point we should talk about, we're already talking about creative process and creativity.
I was going to wrap that to the
artists,
end. There's amazing people like Foss and Ed Templeton have contributed to the art.
The Pinocchio story is an interesting one, especially somebody that's in recovery, because it's very much a morality tale, and it's very much, traditionally about sort of going astray. I mean, that one was real low-hanging fruit. It's a very moralistic story. It's very spiritual in nature. I mean, and the symbolism of him turning into a donkey, and like, it's all right. I mean, you literally have this Jiminy Cricket character who's his conscience that a lot of the stuff in the book where I talk about keeping him, the Lord, the high, whatever, keeper of, like, what did I say? Like, the straight and narrow path, like that's literally in the movie, in the cartoon. So, but the thing that with Pinocchio that really got me, and this is a funny, kind of a funny twist with the book, was that when I originally, so kind of getting back to the art and the creativity and that being a mirror of the universe and this cosmic experience, you know, is music. Like music, and I know for you, I mean, this is Screaming at the Wall podcast, you got that name from a Minor Threat song. Like, music is our freaking lifeblood. And if there's one thing I've done in my life, all my years at Thrasher magazine, you know, the punk scene, the Grateful Dead, freaking growing dreadlocks, like everything I've done and in this insane charmed life that I've had, I've always followed the music. It's always been about the music, you know what I mean? And to me, music has been like an oracle or something. Like, I listen to music and it has this level of meaning for me that not only calms my nervous system, it gives me energy. It affects, you know, like my nervous system, like it's inspirational. It gives me meaning and identity, you know, that part in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, where they say, weren't we all at some point worshipers, you know, and in this, you know, chapter of the book called We Agnostics, about being agnostic. And he's trying to say, look, man, we are spiritual beings. Haven't we all actually been worshipers? Haven't we all looked at a starry night and thought, wow, there must be something to this experience? And when I read that, what I thought about was Minor Threat. What I thought about was Black Flag and Rudimentary Peni. I was like, I have been a worshiper. Like, when I wanted to be straight edge when I was a teenager, and I couldn't because I was a drug addict, you know, and like I tried. Like, when I heard Minor Threat for the first time, I was like I was like, oh my God, there's a truth here. And there's so much power in this. All these jocks and freaking older kids in high school and all that pressure. And again, I could just be 1-2, fuck you. Like, I don't even drink or smoke. Fuck your frat parties and all that shit. You know what I mean? The rebellion of that was so inspirational to me and so magical. And the funny thing is, like, I even went so far as like draw X's on my hands and shit, you know, and then like I'd be stoned later that fucking day because I'm powerless over alcohol and drugs, you know what I mean? Like, but that idea of being a worshiper, how'd I even get on that fucking Jack?
But isn't that sort of connected to like that pathway, or that desired pathway to like a higher self? Like, but that was like, for me, when I just sort of look at that, it's like, that's where the spiritual side wanted to go. Like, there was a truth there, but the mind, the ego wanted to keep you trapped, smoking the weed.
I mean, the mind, the ego, or was it something physiological? I mean, I don't know.
True,
like, I feel like alcoholism is based in the body. It's based in the mind. We know that it's hereditary, so it's something that I was born with. It's passed on. My grandfather was an alcoholic. My dad, you know, was basically a drug addict, and I just had this thing. My brother didn't have it. He has his own issues or whatever. Everybody has their own issues, but for me, I can't say no to drugs. Like, if they're there, I'm going to do them, even when I say I'm not going to. I don't know that. Not everybody has that.
No,
that's not a thing for everybody. So I don't know, but in any event, how was I trying to tie that to the Pinocchio story? The music, because I was talking about the music. Okay, thank you. So in the Pinocchio, that's what I was trying to get at. When I first did the first draft of the book, every chapter had a song in it, because so much of what Disneyland is about, and part of this creative thing that I experienced, was this whole encompassing experience of the music, the visuals. It was multimedia and is multi-planed. There was a story going on. There was a song that went with the story. The idea of theme, a theme park where everything feeds into this theme. It's very psychedelic. If you've done psychedelics before, you start to see these thematic waves that go through reality, you know, like you'll see somebody and they're just the essence of what they are, you know what I mean? And you're just like, whoa, your hat and your hair totally are you, like, you know what I mean? Like you just see this essential nature through the psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
So there's this theme idea that really resonated for me when I got to Disneyland. And that's what, you know, the other part of what I was trying to say when you first asked the question was what I saw wasn't the commercialism and that crass, you know, consumerism. What I saw was creativity. What I saw was artisticness and music. And it was incredible, you know, mixed with story. So the music on these rides have these fucking lyrics that are insane. Like, it's such a trip. So but I was so afraid from working at Thrasher all day long when we do videos, so much of our life for the last 10 years now that we're in like the YouTube era is about music clearance. And I know how tenacious music law is. Like after Napster and the early aughts and the late 90s, the music industry took a shit. And we were so, you know, I assume you too, like we lived for music and it used to be this thing. And then all of a sudden the DIY thing won and you could get any song anytime for free. And like, fuck, you know, we were all like, fuck the record industry and all this shit. And they took a big hit. And then, you know, 20 years later, 10, 15 years later, they finally figured out we're in this new media era and the way they're going to make their money is monetizing through licensing. So, you know, I'm the tangent after fucking tangent, but I'm just saying, so I took those parts out of the book because I just didn't want to deal with it. Yeah. I thought maybe someday this thing might get picked up by a publisher or something. I just said, I don't want to fight those battles of including these songs.
I was going to say, you're not Disneyland. Is that like...
It could happen. It could happen. That could happen too.
Yeah.
That's fine. I mean, it's part of why I self-publish. It's part of why I don't have a website. It's part of why you can only get it like in the new Etsy era of you can just get it through me. Hit me up on Instagram at YOGI in Disneyland, you know, and that's how you get it. And it's like, you know, it's not... I've done it sort of under the radar, but I don't, I mean, it's silly. I should have just left him in there, honestly. You know, part of it had to do with page count too, because we'd kind of come up with a design and it was like, how could, God,
I like that.
we should keep it this size. And I was like, well, you can just take out all the songs. So we did that. So there's a really roundabout way of getting to the fact that in Pinocchio, for instance, that's a great example. The songs are fucking insane. Like if you study Ram Dass and Advaita and Guru Kripa and these different strains of yogic philosophy and Buddhism, especially Zen Buddhism, like the idea of I've got no strings, the idea that we have these strings of attachment and we're being, you know, in the song, I've got no strings to hold me down, you know, like this idea of liberation, that this puppet has become free. I mean, the idea, especially in yogic stuff with the guru and this sort of like ultimate reality, you know, way of looking at things, like we're all the puppet of the guru. We're all the puppet of God. You know what I mean? And then here's this guy who's having this realization experience, you know. And so that song in particular is just like straight out of like a Ram Dass talk. I've got no strings. And then crazy enough, there's another song in Pinocchio it's an actor's life for me, which again, in the world of yogic philosophy and letting go of identity and identification and those kind of things, like the idea that we're all just an actor playing a part. Ram Dass would always say, you know, we're all just God in drag, which means that essentially we're just in the ultimate reality, we're just God. We're not doing anything. He's doing it all, kind of a thing. And yet we have this, you know, quote unquote, personal identity, this individuality. We're individuated cells, so to speak, in this greater body of God. But it's all an illusion, right? That's sort of the yogic philosophy that this individuality is Maya, that the material world is Maya. It's all an illusion because really we're just God manifesting as being. So just those songs alone were kind of what directed, because you asked me like, what's this story? What's this teaching behind the Pinocchio thing? And it's all tied into identity and oneness with the Creator. And then the way I tied it in was a little bit with Paramahansa Yogananda, who his fellowship is called the Self-Realization Fellowship. So this idea of in yoga is this idea that we're going to become realized selves, that when we're realized, essentially the individual, the individuated self is like this illusion, the small s self, and then there's the ultimate reality, greater capital S self. And realization is when you realize that you're just God in drag, that you're actually just in oneness with God all the time. And this feeling of separation and this illusion of identity and individuality is just that, is Maya, is an illusion. So the fact that Pinocchio starts off as this wooden puppet, which is like the analogy of, in a sense of our enslavement and also just, and our, actual dependency on higher power or whatever, and then his quest is to become literally a real boy. Like his quest is literally to go through realization. And he does that by, if the other thing that's funny that one resonated for you is because it's pretty much just an AA parable. Like it's just a recovery parable. Like basically he goes and drinks beer and smokes cigars and acts like a donkey and turns into a jackass. And then he goes and seeks his father, which can kind of, in Western, storytelling and the Western archetype, Christianity, there's this idea that we're the son and God is the father. That was sort of the analogy that Christ used. So Pinocchio goes off to find his father, which, we know is actually his true birth is God. And then once he becomes selfless and honest, then he becomes real. Then he gets actualized and becomes a real boy, so. It's low hanging fruit.
Did you when you were writing the book, taking like different like stories? Is this something that like what kind of did you do research on the backstories of these stories and how they were created and how and you yourself intertwined the spiritual side with the sort of allegories or these stories that were created, because that's one thing that I'm learning on this path of spirituality is like through all the different religions that exist, that they are all very similar in nature as far as the end point or like what they're trying to get you to point at. Mm-hmm. And I feel like with a story like that, the way that you were able to sort of point, because I never, the only thing I knew, I don't even know if I've ever watched Pinocchio, but I did go on the ride with my daughter when I was there, and that shit was scary. Like it was a dark ride, and it almost felt like there was something else going on that I didn't understand. Yeah. And so reading the story itself, or reading your interpretation of that story was like, maybe I knew intuitively, maybe something deeper inside of me knew that there was something else like going on to it. But
yeah, well, I mean, the quick response to that is that they're archetypes. That there are archetypes. I would hesitate to say that anything is universal at this point. That's a very white man's analysis of the world, that there's these universal truths and everything, but there are pretty big archetypes anyways. Mm-hmm. So this idea of returning to the Father and the scary whale, you know what I mean? It's in the Bible. It's in these. You'll find it in different cultures. Right. It's not universal in the sense that it's in every culture, but you'll find it in different cultures in different times of history. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, truth be told, so what I did basically was, getting back kind of one of your earlier questions was I looked at these archetypes and saw the connection between these fairy tales and the stories that I was hearing in my studies of Buddhism and Hinduism. I don't, well, I'll just leave it at that. So, but that said, there is so that said, these fairy tales are these, the European fairy tales, the Grimm fairy tales, and what's the other one? There's another major, Hans Christian Andersen or something like that. Like these European fairy tales, these are stories that have been passed on through generations.
Are you talking about the Grimm brothers?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, the Grimm fairy tales.
Okay.
And then I'm just saying that, so there was a few authors in Europe that sort of canonized these things, that put them down into certain books that became sort of like the go-to stories. And at that point, they sort of solidified them a bit. But before that, they were oral tradition. And so they were archetypal stories. And so the fact that they would correlate, in a sense, have these parallels within other cultures like East Asia and Southern Asia is not surprising to me, And who knows if there wasn't even actual cross-pollinization. A lot of times we forget how close the Middle East is to Europe and how close, I mean, look at the frickin' Bible, dude. I mean, it's like, that's the European text that came to America. It's all from the Middle East. Like, that's Asia, and if you look at that and how close that, that total tangent.
But I was going to say that my brother, he studies Odinism, and we talk about Buddhism, and he's like, well, that actually reminds me of this, and that.
There you
go. And it's like so on point. I'm like, what they couldn't be like,
Well, they're these human stories. They're these creative stories that come out of people's conscious and subconscious experience. And but the point I was trying to make specifically about Pinocchio is that those stories, and many of the stories that ended up as the backbone of these Disney animated features, and then became the backdrop to the rides, were very dark stories, like very dark, anybody that and I'll tell you, one of the things that really informed me that I loved was there's a podcast called Disney History Podcast or something like that. And that guy is amazing. Like, he goes into these things and tells you, and will the guy does great research. Disney History Institute, I gotta plug him. Like, he's incredible. And he'll just break, and Pinocchio in particular. So, that was just kind of one of the genius things that Walt Disney did. He was kind of like he could take these different stories and these disparate, threads of things and weave them into a story that people could relate to, and was totally entertaining, and really kind of got, and was clear as a clear story, because he would get stories like Pinocchio that were these series. There were serial stories, and so he would just take parts from different ones. It wasn't like there's not a book that you go to that's like that's the Pinocchio, and that's, in some sense, and now I'm just blabbing like a Disney freak, but in some sense that's why the movie Pinocchio doesn't have a very clear storyline to it. Like, he basically fucks up, comes back, immediately goes out and fucks up again. Like, the whole story of Pinocchio is basically this wooden boy that's trying to go to school for one fucking day. He never makes it to school for one fucking day. And he literally he goes off into show business. He comes back. He tries to go, before he can even get back, he gets sucked out to frickin' Pleasure Island. That's what I'm saying. Like, that thing it is a morality play, and it's based on these really dark, think the actual Pinocchio character that's in the books that the guy wrote, the Italian guy wrote it, like, he's a prick. Like, he's gnarly, and he does really pretty shitty stuff. It's not as cute as the Disney version, for sure. And that's one thing that sometimes turns people off to Disney, because it does have this real family friendly air to it.
Well, maybe the newer stuff.
Yeah, the older stuff does tend to be pretty dark, but I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying that it has that sense to it. Maybe it's just the animation style seems a little cuter and less dark, and because it appeals to little kids. But I think with Walt Disney, a lot of what he did was to create stuff that was family oriented, not in this like moralistic, family values kind of bullshit thing that we have nowadays, but in this sense that the whole family could enjoy it, that there was a different planes to it, that on one level, a 3-year-old is like, I love Pinocchio. Yeah. And then, for me as a teenager, I was like, I don't love Pinocchio. But then as I got older, it was like, oh shit, I love Pinocchio. Like, this is a good story, Fuck, he's smoking cigars, drinking beer, like going off to Pleasure Isle. Like, I'm a drug addict. I totally relate to that. He goes off, he wants to be famous, and he gets into show business, and it's like, I could totally relate to that. You know what I mean?
I really got to watch Pinocchio.
Yeah, no, it's a good one.
So when you had that moment, what had really, I guess, led you up to that moment? I mean, we don't have a whole lot of time, and I'm glad that we talked about the crux of the book. But for you, in that journey up into that point, there was a lot going on for you. Can you talk a little bit about that? What preluded that? Like what
that kind of the genesis of the actual idea of doing it, or
yeah. Because it was a buildup, right? Because this is not like we sort of, it's like how a lot of different things are. They're a buildup, and then there's like this point.
Yeah, I mean, I started a daily practice of sitting meditation, and then the whole media influx with YouTube and podcasts. And reading. I'm a voracious reader. I'm always reading. I always have a book I'm reading. Listen to a lot of books on Audible at the same time. So all that was coming together. I've been sober for, at the time I'd been sober for 20 years or something, and it had, developed this practice of service to other alcoholics and drug addicts and mentoring people, and developing this conscious contact with a higher power, whatever that is, based on my real life experience. I never went to church. I've never, I'm not a freaking, what do you call that? Not even a scholar, but like I'm not into, I wish I could think of that word, scripture. I'm not into scripture. I don't read scripture. Like, I watched fucking Disney cartoons and watched YouTube videos. Like, we live in this incredible era. This book couldn't have been written any other time, but I could just like Wikipedia. I mean, it's lame. I don't want to make it sound too trite and too shallow, but if I needed to know what Durga meant or what some deity was that was floating around in my head, I looked it up, you know what I mean? But I'm saying, I had this, so that was sort of the development, all that was my practice, so that when I got there, I started, and I can tell you the actual story. It's kind of in the book too, is the chapter on Indiana Jones. And that was the one where that ride is insane. Like, literally, I'm reading Thich Nhat Hanh, I'm going to, I'm studying Buddhism. I'm doing this refuge recovery thing. I'm, learning. I've read Noah's books, and I, and we're talking about Mara all the time. And then you get to this ride, and it's literally about the eye of Mara. And I was like, that's funny. Here's Buddhism, the story. It's like right on. Yeah, it's very on the nose. You know what I mean? So I'm looking at it, and that was kind of where it started. And I was like, wow, that's insane. Like, here's this story of the Buddha's awakening, like right in Disneyland. And then when you come out, I mean, this is in the book, when you come out of the ride, and there's a twist to this story. When you come out of the ride, you come face to face with this Hanuman statue, this monkey statue, and he's holding a scepter with like a crystal on it for like, so obviously about clarity and meditation. He's like meditating, he's smiling, he's fat like the Buddha, but it's basically Hanuman. And that statue was in Disneyland from the day it opened. Like that ride is from 1955, the Jungle Cruise. Oh, shit. So I'm having this experience, I'm going through the ride, I'm having a great time, my son's there. It's all very material world, but it's all very entertaining. It's musical. There's all these cobras in the ride and and cobras. I got the tattoo, like, without even being into this shit, which is ironic, but cobras represent meditation, the hood of the cobras, like going inward. And so, and there's just this whole story. There's literally carvings of people meditating in the ride. And I'm just like, this is so rad. And then I come out and in the Ram Dass Fellowship, the guru, this guy Neem Karoli Baba, he's considered an avatar of Hanuman. And so they're very into the Ramayana, the Ramayana story of Ram and Sita and Hanuman. So they chant about Hanuman. We talk about Hanuman all the time. Hanuman is this deity of devotion to God, of, when I don't see you, he says to God, to the manifestation of God, to Ram, he says, when I don't see you, I'm messing up the quote, but it's about the, becoming oneness with God. When I can't see you, I believe in you or something. And then when I can see you, I am you. This idea of being devoted as the individual and then coming to oneness. So as awakening. So in any event, here's Hanuman. I come out of the ride about Mara and awakening and meditation, and then there was Hanuman, and I was like, this is hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, look at this. This is the story of awakening, and these Hindu and Buddhist stories are right here in Disneyland. This is great. And then, so what happened was then I go, oh, well, what about these other rides? And so I'd go on another ride, and I'd go on Pinocchio and be like, holy shit, I've got.
So that was the first ride that got you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay.
So then I was like, well, hold on. I'm on fucking, Peter Pan or Pinocchio or whatever. And oh, look at this story about awakening. I've got no strings, the actors, life for me, like God in drag. Holy shit. Then I go on fucking on Snow White. And I'm like, oh my God, she bites this apple. It's like the Bible. And there's this story and all these rides are about coming home to your true birth. And Jack Kornfield, he talks about this thing because I've listened in Jack's podcasts, and he says that many of the Buddhist texts, I totally put this right in the book. Many of the Buddhist texts start with this idea of "O ye nobly born." That there's this idea in Buddhism of being noble, of having a noble birth, and then in Christianity I'm not a Christian. They talk about the kingdom of God, and that's the real metaphor in these fairy tale stories and Disneyland in general is this idea of the kingdom, So so Disney, you open the gates and you enter the kingdom. And that's basically like this state of pure love and forgiveness and generosity. And so that metaphor was so blatant in all these things. So I just started. So what happened was I would just go through a ride and start writing about it. And then I'd move on to the next ride. And it was really
just to clarify, it wasn't all in one day.
No.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that long. It took about 6 months.
Oh, okay.
And
so at that point when you started to realize that there was these connections, you're like, I maybe
made a list before I wrote each chapter, but I kind of went through and said, well, this ride's kind of about this. Alice in Wonderland is, everybody's written about Alice in Wonderland, about consciousness and reality and social agreements and all that kind of stuff. Like that one is real heady. It's very psychedelic. Yeah. It's been used in psychedelia and all these different threads. Right. So I just started to see that, that there was this possibility. And as I went through the rides, even before I was writing it, I realized like, I got enough here for a fucking book. Here's the thing. Once I got my eyes opened by the Indiana Jones ride, I started to go through the rest of the rides. And I really was skeptical. I was like, this is funny. This is like writing a dissertation on Bob Dylan or something. Like, it's a funny idea.
Yeah, it's light.
It's cute.
It's light. Yeah.
But it's not going to hold up. But what happened was I just kept going through each ride, and it worked. It just kept working. It kept working to the point where I was like, I have a fucking book here. I got to do this. And so I went through it, and, there was some magical, serendipitous, synchronicitous, thanks for giving me the word. It's some things that happened while I was writing the book because I'm listening to a lot of these podcasts and I'm watching videos and I'm listening to books, and I would be listening to a book and they would go off about Pinocchio. I'd be listening to a book about spirituality and they would go off about Alice in Wonderland, like right when I was on that chapter. And I'd be like, like driving in the car trying to write down the fucking, was that 6 minutes and 37 seconds? And like, you know what I mean? Like,
I feel like that starts happening quite a
Yeah,
bit. I mean,
it
I don't really know what that is,
Yeah.
but the more I meditate, the more open I'm becoming to.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. There's
I
something.
try not to get too into it. I know it's really popular amongst, I don't want to condemn it either, but my story about that is that, so I'm watching this thing about the Dalai Lama, and it's on Netflix or something. This person goes to see the Dalai Lama speak, and so they're doing this talk. And so I always figure the Buddhists, they're so freaking prim and like, they don't want to talk about magic. They don't want to talk about freaking ooh-ah, they want to get into our actual feelings, our actual experience, the mindfulness, the real truth. Like, whereas the Hindus and the New Age people and the Wicca and all this stuff, like, they want to get as psychedelic and cosmic and fluorescent as possible. And so I tend to, whatever. So with the Buddhists, I just expect it to be very austere, basically. Like, we're very equanimous. We're not going to get too happy about anything. We're not going to get too sad about anything. Whereas I'm like, fuck balance. Where's balance in 100% surrender, man? Like, I want to be all just like hardcore.
That's that punk. I mean? That's that punk rock energy.
Yeah,
man.
yeah. So
I'm right there with you.
But so in any event, this is a total tangent. But so I'm watching this thing on literally the Dalai Lama, and I know that it's translated. He's not speaking in English, but there's subtitles at the bottom. And it's this thing about mandala, and they're doing this. So if anybody wants to try to find it, it's this thing where he's there. They do this whole, which is interesting that it's this very ritualistic holiday in Buddhism. As much as the Westerners try to characterize Buddhism as being very austere and not about, Noah with his, I'm a Buddhist atheist and all this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, and then you see different types of Buddhism, and you're like, I think that's green Tara over there. That looks like a freaking demon, or whatever, like some magical being or so, like, that doesn't look very austere, you know what I mean? But whatever, I'm just saying, so obviously there's very many different veins in Buddhism, but my own conception of it is that it's this more like, we're going to cut through the bullshit and the magic and all that stuff and take this middle path thing, I'm not dismissing that. I'm just saying my conception of it is that it's rather straight-laced.
Yeah.
And he's talking it, like I said, I know that it's translated, so I can't tell you exactly what he said, but the English translation is, he's like, okay, they start meditating, they close their eyes, and he's like, you'll find you may find when you start meditating that you become mildly clairvoyant. I was like, wait a second. This is the fucking Dalai Lama saying this shit? Like, so going back to the like serendipity and frickin' synchronicity and the like, it was meant to be in the universe manifested and that whole kind of magical realism kind of thing. Like, the shit happened. It happened to me, dude. And here's the fucking story that I think is just the funniest one that I love, which is, I put the fucking Lincoln experience in the book. Why did I do that? That's not even a ride. It kind of is because it's dark, and the book's about dark rides. And for anybody that gets to the book, dark doesn't mean sinister or anything like shadow or any of that kind of stuff. Dark just means literally that you go inside this ride and it's dark. And then these dark rides, they tell a story. That's how they became this archetypal vehicle for this book of awakening, was because there was these I went to Disneyland, and here's all these stories, and there are these mythic tales. So, but there's this Lincoln experience, great moments with Mr. Lincoln, and you go in there, and it's this animatronic Lincoln, and he tells this speech, and I mean, I go through it in the book. Well, right when I get to that chapter, and this is one of the funny things, so much of Buddhist, of Hindu and yogic philosophy is based on the Bhagavad Gita, which is this tale of Krishna and Arjuna. And then there's the Ramayana, which is the story of Sita and Ram and Hanuman and how they battle this demon Ravana. So these are these mythic, and in some ways, and I don't want to offend anybody, but they're almost like Marvel like stories. Like, they're these superheroes, and there's demons and monsters and these guys with great costumes and colorful skin, and there's these amazing literature. They're also steeped in the deepest truth, you know, of being and consciousness and devotion. So I had never read either of those. And I mentioned them by name in the introduction of this book. Like I say, it's one of the things I say, like the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana are these love poems, these songs of life, of God, of love. And so is Star Wars. And so is Beauty and the Beast. Well, truth is, I'd never actually read those books when I wrote that. I just knew the stories, you know. And so I was like writing the book and I was like, dude, you should really fucking read a treatment of the Bhagavad Gita. Like, I didn't even know that it's basically this like 60,000 verse poem that's written in Sanskrit. Like, it's kind of literally impenetrable to read, but there's been people that have talked about the teachings, and so there was a Westerner that wove this story out of it. That's much more like the Marvel thing in a sense. And I don't want that to sound dismissive, or let me just say, look, I understand if somebody listening to this thinks that is dismissive and offensive. I recognize that. That's there. I'm listening to this guy, actually, you know what? It was Eknath Easwaran. He does a treatment of the Bhagavad Gita. So I'm listening to his, not even reading it. It's audible. I'm just going to be honest. You know what I mean? But I realize, and I'm loving it. I'm totally resonating with these teachings. It's the raddest, truth-based, truth of being, consciousness, love, like makes me just beam, like laser beams coming out of my third eye, farting rainbows all day. You know what I mean? I'm reading this thing. And I realized that the story of Arjuna and Krishna and this tale of truth and being is the Civil War. Like, it's literally the story of this family that has this division between these, that has this fight amongst themselves. I'm writing the fucking Lincoln thing. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, what? Bhagavad Gita, there it is. The Civil War, this guy who's literally, I mean, and it's so funny, like, he's literally Honest Abe, like, he's the truth bringer. And that's so much about what the story of Krishna and this kind of teaching, this philosophy of yoga is about, finding this ultimate truth kind of thing. So you have Honest Abe, the truth guy, and then Krishna, he plays a flute, you know, that's like one of the things he does. And, in a lot of the tales about Krishna, and you're in, and I'm in the Lincoln thing, and you just hear this flute, you know, whatever the song is, probably like whatever the song that the Union plays. And so back then they had these fife and drum things, very American thing. It's American history, and that's in there. And I'm just like, I mean, I'm like, well, there's Krishna's flute, and here's this story about this guy that's the truth bringer, Honest Abe. And then what does he do? He defends the Union, right? And what does yoga mean? Union. Like, literally, we have this archetypal story in our country of the fracturedness of this being, America. And then there's the truth bringer with his flute and fight, you know, like, that comes in and wants to restore union. And that's the story of yoga, you know what I mean? And like, that's where the serendipity stuff was happening. I didn't think of that before I started writing the book.
Either you're super creative in your ability to be able to just take something and fucking give it this profoundness, fucking artistic expression of, or I mean, I definitely would side with the fact that there's truth in that. I think once you, and I think that's what the spiritual path really does, is starts to open up that mind, that whatever this is, it opens it up a little bit more to where you start to see these connections, because I'm right there with you, brother. Like I'm experiencing it right now. I've been, whenever I'm very open to it. It's when you start to notice it, you know?
Yeah. Well, think about this one. Maybe I'll leave you with this. I think we're kind of at the end, right?
Yeah.
But think about this. Where do we live? Like, what country do we live in? The USA, right? America, we call it. It's the United States of America. Like, just think about what that means from a meditation point of view. And that's really what this book is it's just going through Disneyland from a meditator's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am meditating, and I'm learning about union and consciousness and states of awareness and and it's like, really, we literally live in a country called the United States of America. Like, if that's not yoga, like, we literally live in the country of yoga, the United States of consciousness of America. You know, like, I was just like, this is ridiculous. I was just like, mic drop, like, boom, okay, I'm going to write this book, you know? And we didn't really get to it. But so I wrote this thing thinking, this is weird. And who the fuck, I'm come from this punk rock world, skateboarding. Who the fuck's going to resonate with this? But I was turning 50. And I had been at Thrasher for 25 years, and I just went and cashed in all my chips. Like, whatever, that's getting ahead of the story. What I did was I started to reach out to people, Ed Templeton, Tim Lehigh, people that I never would have thought would want to do this. And they all said yes. And I don't know if it's just because they want, I've worked with these people for 20, 30 years, but so I wrote this thing by myself, on my own, as a solitary act. But what the story really became was this community creation. And the fact that the creation of the book was me reaching out to these people and them creating this artwork and allowing me to use it in this book and meeting people like Pale Horse through frickin' Instagram and through one of my advertisers, and meeting, another skateboard artist, Todd Bratchett, or meeting I met people at skateboard demos and stuff, and I would just it would come up, and they'd be like, I want to do a painting for it. And I'd just be like, the skateboard world fucking rules, dude. Like, that community showed up. And when I wrote this thing, I thought, I want to reach out to the Ram Dass organization. I was really passionate about that. No offense to them, but they were like, didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. They're like, well, I told Raghu Marcus, who's like the guy that runs the Ram Dass podcast network, about it. And I brought him the thing. I know some people. I got to I can get to, the right people to talk to. And I went and pitched Raghu in person, and he literally didn't even look at it. The first thing that came out, he goes, you can't do that. And I was just like, watch me, motherfucker. No, not really. I was respectful. I like Rog. Whatever. He's a great guy. The stuff he produces is awesome, but
he underestimated your DIY.
I don't know. I've sent it to him since then, and I haven't heard back. But in any event, I'm just saying, like, I thought I'd be doing things in yoga studios and nothing from the yoga world. Maybe because I don't do hatha, asana yoga. I don't know. That world's just different from the skateboard world. Yeah. And, the artists that I got, there's a guy, Robert Ryan, who's this rad tattoo artist. I don't know if you know him. He did this Hanuman thing that I used as the Yeti.
Pause?
Yeah.
Just, you can hold that.
So, Robert Ryan did this Hanuman painting that I end up using for the, Matterhorn, because the Matterhorn has this Yeti in it. This was another synchronistic thing that happened. Like, I literally saw this on Instagram. I'd already met Robert. I love him to death. Sweetest guy in the world. Go get a tattoo from Robert Ryan. Coolest dude ever. Tim Lehigh, the best. Like, there's a bunch of rad tattoo artists in here. Danny Boy Smith, Beth Gould. Hit these people up. They're all excellent. But so Robert's very into Hinduism and I guess Guru Kripa, in a sense. He has a guru, and I don't want to speak for him, but he does actual practice, sadhana. I saw this on Instagram, and I was like, dude, is that for my book? Because this looks like the Matterhorn, and this looks like the Yeti. Uh-huh. And he's like, no, but you can use it. Like, that's the kind of shit that the tattoo and skateboard world does. They're not like, oh, I'm trying to get ahead and fucking my thing. Like, I asked fucking some pretty well-known yoga teacher to write an intro for the book. He didn't even respond. You know what I mean? And whatever, I get it. Like, maybe this is bad for their look. You know what I mean? If you're trying to be all like holy, and whatever. I don't want this to be a thing where I'm talking shit, but I'm just saying, like, it didn't resonate for some people, but in the skate world, in the tattoo world, people were stoked and they all said yes.
Well, you're aware the fact that that community is very open to really anything when it
can be
for the most part.
I was shocked. Honestly, I'm still like just blown away, you know, like I didn't think people would be into it because I talk about God nonstop. I mean, that's a non-starter for a lot of people, dude. I mean, we're against the stream Buddhist atheist like talking about God, like that's weird for a lot of people. It's too weird for Disney. I tried to pitch Disney on doing this essentially, not like the higher ups, but I know some people like I can get through. I mean, we do Juxtapose magazine too. I can get through to some people. You know, it's what I do. I sell advertising. I talk to freaking Nike and New Balance and Adidas. Like I could talk to some people, you know, but Disney, like, no way. They don't want anything that says God in it. And that was, so, in any event, I mean, quick side, I swear it's quick. Twist with the Hanuman. Remember I told you that the moment of awakening was when I saw the Hanuman statue? They took that out.
That was the
over COVID.
Monkey, right?
Yeah, they took the Hanuman statue in the Jungle Book. I mean, the Jungle Cruise. When you come out of the Indiana Jones ride, that I was like, I got to write. This is funny. There's Hanuman. Like I've been worshiping, like like singing and chanting my love and devotion to this being, and he's right here in Disneyland. You know what I mean? And like that was like the inspiration of a book. They took that out during frickin' COVID.
Did you find out why?
Well, I'm sure it's because of cultural appropriation and the sensitivity around religious symbols and stuff. I mean, I can understand in a sense why they did it, but I don't think they fully understand how Hinduism works, and it's not like Christianity in terms of like a religion and icon. I don't know. I'm not from India, so scratch whatever I say. I'm just a white guy from Ojai. Like I don't have the cultural voice to speak for that, but I can at least see that some people could get up in arms about it. I mean, they put Hanuman in freaking Black Panther, dude, and I was like, yes. You know, the Jabari tribe. Like, I was like, holy shit. And they're like, we will eat your children. And then he's like, and then he goes, I'm just messing with you. We're vegetarians. And I was just like, yes, I love that shit. I'm sure people were freaking bummed about it, but to me it was
funny. That's funny.
But anyways, I think the point I was trying to get at was just that the skate world in the tattoo world, they came through. And Robert Ryan, he said, stick with our people, stick with your people, stick with our people. Cause I was like, I'm going to go to Disney. I'm going to try to get them to put this thing out. I got stars in my eyes and delusions of grandeur of how big this thing could be. I'm going to try to find a publisher. I'm going to go to the Ram Dass people and see if they'll put this out. You know what I mean? And he was like, dude, you should just do it. Like, just stick with the skateboard and the tattoo world. And when he told me that, I was like, nah, I'm going to go big, dude. And I got shot down by all those people. And then I end up publishing it myself. And I'm like, Robert is a wise man.
Shout out to Ryan.
yeah, Robert Ryan. But, and then just to cap that off, that became the most wonderful thing about this book was the fact that, I'm kind of a loner in some ways. Like I'm very outgoing and I could, I'm a sales guy. I work in advertising, like sales. Like I like to chop it up, but at the same time, I do a lot, I'm a meditator. I like to be alone. I'm quiet. I create, I write songs by sitting in my room wood shopping, you know what I mean? And I'm in a 3-piece band, not a 7-piece band, with a horn section and shit. I was like a bass player, a drummer, and me singing, playing guitar, and writing all the songs. You know what I mean? Like, but this became a collaborative project. And I didn't plan that. And that is what really makes this magic for me. Like when I look at list of freaking artists on here, this right here, that's God. That is a power greater than myself. That's not something that I planned or, like I showed up, I did the work, I put out the requests. I mean, very directly, I literally asked for these people to do it, but they said yes. And they sent this artwork in, and this became this community project that when I released it, I didn't get any calls from yoga studios. I didn't get calls from a publisher. I didn't get money. Where did I go? I went to frickin' FTC on Haight Street, you know, the birthplace of psychedelia, which was perfect, and did an event at the skate shop. I went to Laguna Beach to a shop called Handplant that's not there anymore. Laguna Beach, another psychedelic, you know, center place. Back in the day, before it became super ritzy as it is now, but in the 60s, it's a pretty wild place. But again, an artist community with tons of art and tons of surfing and tons of skating. That's where I did it, at Handplant, you know what I mean? And then, you know, the one foray I made into the spiritual world was here at Against the Stream. So shout out to Against the Stream.
Yeah, thanks for letting us use this space too.
Yeah, I love Noah. I love what Against the Stream does. Refuge recovery, all that stuff.
Well, I mean, we really could talk, I think, a lot more about a lot more other things. Unfortunately, I gotta take off.
Yeah, me too.
But I want to say thank you for giving me your time, sharing your story. Any last shout outs and just direct people again where they can find the book?
Yeah, Instagram at Yogi in Disneyland. That's where you can get it. That's the spot. And I think just shout out to all the artists that contributed. There's a list there on the book. You can only get the book through me, so hit me up on the DMs. That's the way to do it. Keeping it underground, keeping it out of the eyes of Disney and anybody that was.
As someone who wasn't a fan of Disneyland, as much, I want to say that the stories are very detailed, and I just really loved how you were able to intertwine like the spiritual stories of different religions and that in itself I think deserves attention, and the fact that you can bring some sort of spiritual awareness into these stories and into these rides, it was unexpected for me, to be honest with you. So it was really, I went on like a theme ride. Like I didn't really know what to expect. And I enjoyed hearing you sort of expound on it as well.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't find God right here in America, what's the fucking point? You got to go off to India. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like this.
Yeah. So, and so I'm
God's everywhere.
I agree with that. And, I'm gonna end it, but I just want to say thank you to you as well. You're someone that I was able to interact with when I was kind of going through something. You know, I was in a dark place, and you're one of the few people that helped me through that process, which was I actually wanted to talk about that, but I don't have time because I just feel like there's wisdom. There's the whole. This whole thing is about sharing, right? Like I struggle even with the idea of like I go through experience, you want to share it because I somehow feel like it's attached to my identity. My ego is that I just want to share it but the more I engaged and interact with the people that, and of course there's people that have learned from me, you know what I mean? Like I owned a skate shop, so I had a direct connection and to the community and helping younger people along. And I do think it is important. So I'm starting to like understand that a lot more. And I think we need more people like that and more people that go through these experiences to share, because it helps us in this process, or don't. You don't have to do shit with your experience. You know what I mean?
No.
But no, it feels weird to like say it in the camera because I didn't tell you like, but it really helped me to sort of process certain things, and it really was kind of the catalyst for me to be like, okay, let me go a little bit more into the darkness that I was into, which is sort of ironic, but to sort of make discoveries in those shadows, which I think is important. And I think a lot of these stories that are being relayed here are like touching on that. So there's like
yeah, we didn't really get into that, but you know, this idea of that enlightenment, awakening, is this transcendence from our humanity, is something that I definitely speak against in this book. And that's why Disneyland is a great place to study God and spirituality. Like, it's not about transcending the human experience. And you talked about going into the shadow and facing that and not casting out whole parts of our personality under this guise of, you know, equanimity or balance or something. It's like true balance is like knowing that we get really sad, that we get really angry, that we have resentment and fear, and, you know, meeting that face to face. And that's something I definitely tried to, you know, with like the haunted house ride and that stuff, you know.
That's like Carl Jung. You know what I mean? It's interesting that the psychology and spirituality I'm starting to discover is very much like intertwined.
But also just the human experience itself. That you know, I'm really happy when I look back at the book now, since I wrote it a couple years ago, that I go back and I go, oh, this isn't ungrounded. This is grounded spirituality. That throughout the book I talk about not getting too caught up in the mind, but coming back to the heart and not running away from who we are, but facing who we are, and that kind of thing about. I think that grounding is the new buzzword. It was mindfulness, and now we're moving into the grounded phase of
these hashtag.
But I was glad that as we move into this new realm of buzzwords, that I went back and I was like, no, it's legit. You know what I mean? But in on that vein, I think you're right. You know, I mean, writing a book is great, but what was the real magic for me was connecting with those other people and doing these events with community face to face. We can all, and that's sort of a mirror of this process, I feel like, of we have all this media and information available to us, and then we have actual conversations with people. So it's like, I got to remember that too. Like, I study, and that's up here. And I got to remember to call you when I come to town.
Yeah.
Call my homie when I come to town. Go to the refuge recovery meeting with him this morning at 7:30. Don't just like blow people off and get all caught up and, you know, hanging out with my girlfriend or studying or working or whatever. Like it, and COVID was hard for that, you know?
Yeah.
Like it cut us off, you know? So the fact that we're able to, like, you know, texting is great and it's really great, but you know what? A lot of times I want to call somebody or go see them, you know, and it's crazy because we live in this time of this real intense dynamic of like extreme intimacy. Like social media is this sort of false intimacy world that we live in, where everything is put out as this sense of intimacy. You're going to see my closest, deepest truths. I'm going to show, you know, emotionally and physically, like come right into my bedroom, you know, this false sense of intimacy. But then we're really just projecting it to a faceless entity. And that, what a weird dynamic we're living in, you know, of like this false intimacy, basically, this sense that we're connected to the entire world through our phones, and yet we suffer from this sense of no connection whatsoever. We feel more isolated than ever, you know what I mean? And you know, everybody knows this. I mean, I'm not the first person to say this, but you know, let's call each other. Let's meet in person. Because you said I reached out to you, right? That helped me. You know what I mean? The fact that I got to call you and you're like, hey man, I'm feeling down. I'm really, you know, this thing's bothering me, and I could be there and listen to you, and you listen to me.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you about my experience, and we shared that.
That shared energy. You and another person that I just met, it's been a lot of spiritual engagement. You were talking about the word intimacy and mirror, and I think the more you have that, like in your life, a direct connection to where it's interesting to see people go through like a spiritual process, or you sort of hold up they hold up a mirror, right? So you can see these people. You have this direct connection. There's this energy going back and forth, and that's also very important because sometimes, like, if you're not engaged with the self, you sort of neglect that, and you don't see like what is actually just there.
Yeah.
So the more you have those engagements where it's like, it is like these, like a direct intimacy where it's not like this fake like thing. And I don't know if that's just with people that are into punk rock that find spirituality, but really it's about being authentic and genuine. And a part of that is actually living the experience versus just holding up this, you know, facade or this fake thing up here to be like, this is where I am, but I'm not really grounded there.
The next fake facade media creation that I plan to come out with is going to be a book on punk rock using like my old flyer collection and all that stuff and it's going to be basically like a yogi in punk rock land.
Okay.
And tying spirituality to the punk experience, which Noah has obviously pioneered that, you know, in terms of Dharma punks and his thing.
I look forward to that. It actually reminds me of Greg Graffin. He had I think it was Anarchy Evolution. He had written that, and he was sort of tying in like punk rock to evolution.
Cool.
Very interesting. And again, these are these concepts that you're like, well, how the fuck is this possible?
But then he sees it.
If you can talk about spirituality in Disneyland and you walk away with like, wow, I have a deeper understanding, and actually have you have created this thing that allows me to see something without judgment, and actually to be able to see a little bit deeper into something. That's always something.
Yeah. Well, I love that Noah really set up this thing of Buddhism as rebellion, as spirituality as a rebellious practice, going against the stream. But the part that I was always like, dude, but like, how are the germs spiritual? How is Black Flag spiritual? How does suicidal tendencies tie into Buddhism or Hinduism? You know what I mean? Like, that was the only part where I was always like, go deeper. It's very good you used punk rock as this analogy for Buddhism and for spirituality, but talk more deeper about punk. Let's get into the details of this thing where we can really see a spiritual message in this song, on this record, in this image. You know what I mean? So look for that. Hopefully, now that I put it out there, I'll have to do it.
You'll have to do it.
And
we're holding you accountable.
So we can get together. And then last little pitch, I say, my dream really is to do a Disney day, a yogi day at Disneyland. So putting this out there too, what I'd really like to do is do it during Navratri, which is the celebration of Durga. And I mean, this is another one of these synchronistic stories. So when I put the book out, the day that it came out, I didn't plan this at all. I swear to God, total synchronicity, was the first day of Navratri, which is the celebration of Durga. And the cover of the book is Durga riding on the Cheshire Cat instead of a tiger. So I feel like it's good anniversary. That already happened. It's been established. It's on the book. So think September 26th through October 5th, hopefully this year, 2022, do a meetup at Disneyland. We could even go through the rides in the order of the book, or just do whatever we want. I'm into, if anybody wants to work with me on that, make a flyer, help me promote it, I'd love to get together in person with people. That is really the key to this fucking thing. We've done enough COVID. We've done enough isolation, enough YouTube, enough studying on our own. Let's get together and actually exchange energy. And the other target date for me in general is spring equinox, because it's this time of rebirth and regeneration after the winter solstice, which I talk some about that cyclical cycle seasons kind of thing in the chapter on the Haunted Mansion, but the holiday edition with Jack Skellington. So I love spring equinox. I'm doing a thing this year. This might not come out until afterwards, but basically at Mercy Hot Springs, which is sort of in the Central Valley up near Hollister, Gilroy kind of, but inland off the 5. And I want to make that into an annual event also. So if anybody's into helping me organize spring equinox event and/or Navratri. Let's get together.
What was your Instagram one more time?
At Yogi in Disneyland.
You got it? All right. Well, thank you, Eben. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, high five.
Thank you. Much
All right.
gratitude.
Make sure you follow Eben on Instagram. Make sure you give us a subscribe and a follow and share. Share this story. Sharing is caring. I'm going to end it. I'm always terrible at ending it, but I'm going to say peace. See you next time.
Why are you rebelling again?
What do you got?
We were trying to change something.
Skateboarding is a way of learning how to redefine the world around you.
The owners of this country don't care about the poor and young.
Now, baby, push me.